All right, welcome everybody. Luckily, we are stubborn and full of purpose and mission in us. This is our fourth time at this conversation because we're breaking the internet. We're bringing forward the conversations that they probably don't want us to talk about, and we're gonna do it anyways. So I'm here with Ian Hawks and his partner Aspen. Please introduce yourselves as we open things up here.
Take us away, baby.
I'm Dr. Aspen. I'm a naturopathic doctor and I have a specialty in pelvic health. So I do hands-in work with women. And so I hear a lot about women's experiences with their pelvis, with intimacy, with their own bodies. So it fe felt appropriate to kind of jump on here, mostly just to be a female presence in this space while you have this conversation. And here to check in my body as you speak and see if anything doesn't quite land that I can put in the space, but mostly just to be present as a witness to you guys diving into this important topic. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
hmm My name is Ian Hawks. I am co-founder of Men's Sexual Mastery. So I also work in the space of men's sexual health, education, embodiment, empowerment, and integrity. This integrity piece is really crucial, and that's going to be something that is obviously quite relevant with the discussion that we're going to dive into today. So, also know Ean Wood through Sacred Sons, and we've shared some really powerful spaces together in brotherhood, in a type of brotherhood that I know, and I know you know, Ian, is one of the solutions to this egregious place that we find ourselves in collectively with men who are horribly out of integrity with sexuality and sexual energy and the degree of harm that's being caused and continues to be caused as a result of that. So looking
Yeah.
forward to talking through this with you, brother.
I think that's a beautiful place to start, which is how, this integrity piece that is so important right now because how could men be in integrity with their relationship to sexuality right now? And why this thought is coming to my head is it hasn't even been present in spaces like Sacred Sons, the Mankind Project, these places that are dedicated to men's personal development. Not even there are we hardly talking about sexual integrity. And this is why I'm so passionate, and I assume you're so passionate, is there's so little of this conversation going on anywhere, in books, in programs, in all these things. I feel like in all the men's development stuff, sexuality is somehow put over in some cupboard and locked away. And so, yeah, it's all coming to surface right now, and I think it's important to bring that to the conversation is that it's just coming in even into men's personal development spaces. You're a big part of bringing it to Sacred Sons. I'm a big part of bringing it to Sacred Sons, that it's like, just waving that flag. It's time to teach integrity so that men even know what that is, because most men don't even know. And so that's a perfect lead into this conversation.
hmm Yeah, and Ian, I don't know that we have actually addressed what this conversation is about. So
Yes.
would you give us the little intro, give any of the listeners a little
Yes, of
intro as to
course.
what it is that we're alluding to here?
Yeah, and in this conversation, we're particularly talking about the CNN story that just came out that's about the Rape Academy, which was on a porn website, and it had subsections within that porn site where men were posting videos and teaching one another how to drug their partners, their wives, their spouses, how to drug them, how to rape and have sexual experiences, how to film that, and how to share it. So, an like as terrible of a story as it gets, as dark, as shadowy as it gets, that's the story that we're diving into and really talking about our perceptions of this. And Ian and I and Aspen were talking about at the beginning, like solution focused. What do we do to create change? Is there anything about the story that you think is important to speak to before we start going into it?
One of the pieces that really stood out for me is the some of the stories that were shared from wives who had this experience of being drugged and raped by their husbands, by their partners. And the the reality for women of moving through the world already in a place of vulnerability. So many women that I've spoken with have shared that there is an element of vulnerability and being on edge, walking the streets at night, going somewhere alone, being in a bar or a place where there are men that they don't know and don't trust. And the very real reality of vulnerability for women moving out in the world and a sense of fear and awareness that, okay, there are predators out there. For a woman to then go into her own home with her husband or partner or loved ones, the one place where she might be able to feel actually truly safe and secure, and to now for those women who learned that this was happening without their awareness, and for other women to now realize or learn that holy shit, this is happening. Am I even safe with my partner? And so there are so many horrific aspects to this story, and that one part feels like really alive because there's this complete lack of safety that so many women are experiencing. And so how can we as men start to create a more safe environment at home and in the world so that the women and children can actually move through the world feeling safe and secure and able to actually just live with a sense of freedom and aliveness. And so that's one thing that really stood out for me. I didn't read the story for a while because I didn't want to put a lot of attention and energy towards it. And I was aware that there's a lot of darkness there. And then when I actually did go into it, that was a piece that was like, holy shit. And so I want to also hear from Aspen. Um, yeah, what comes up for you? Is there anything that feels important to name or speak to on this CNN piece?
Just the gravity of it, unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me that something like this exists. But when I found out that it was mainly about like partners drugging their partners, um, that like sent a whole chill through my body in a way that's just like, ugh. I because becoming in touch with that feeling of like going home, like you're speaking to, and that being reality, like it's one thing to, I've heard I had multiple friends in early 20s go to the bars and be drugged, and fortunately were like taken home by their friends or partners. Um, but the reality of going home and having this happen is just absolutely wild to me, and that's the part that I also was really connected with, in a horrible way. Yeah.
And I feel like there's an extra energy behind this coming after the Epstein files that is, will anyone be held accountable? That obviously would, in my judgment, bring more fear for women, which is like, is anyone going to be held accountable for this? You know, with prominent figures being protected by the government, being protected by media channels, not even talking about it, doing everything possible to deter from holding anyone responsible. So we're coming out of a wave of that as well. And so that's predominantly the energy that I'm experiencing in this conversation, which is kind of like, you know, let's get these people, let's hold people accountable. Let's hold people accountable. Let's punish people. Let's, make them be responsible for their actions and the harm of other people. And I think that this is how we behave within societies right now, is utilizing punishment as a tool to adjust behaviors. And,
Mhm.
making it really clear as we go into other parts of this conversation, for at least for me, is that yes, the punishment is how we can exist in this society today, to say if you do things outside of the lines, you're going to be reprimanded for them. It's a way of shaping behavior. And we can obviously see that there are cracks in that as well, because there are tons of people locked up and we're still on this path of, if we punish enough people, will that make only good people? I don't think so. So
Mhm.
we're in this kind of rat's nest of like, how do we work with punishment, but also find solutions outside of the ruts that we're in, that just punishing people isn't working. So I want to pass it on the conversation around punishment and like what needs to happen here, as I'd like to even go into another layer of the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's a commonly understood irony that the penitentiary system, at least in the US, is referred to as a correctional system because it's clear to see, looking at any statistics, that corrections are seldom for people who actually go through that system. So, on one hand, I hear you speaking to the punishment piece of locking people up have, you know, who have committed these offenses. And on the other side, I think about this, yeah, the term of correctional facilities being just inappropriate for what actually happens in there. And ultimately, this all comes back to, like you're saying, so what do we do? Like, yes, consequences are important. And actually one piece around the consequences that I think is important is for there to be a really clear cultural understanding of what is consent and what is not consent. Not to say that this situation, the situation that the CNN piece highlighted, there was clearly no consent there. I think anyone in their right mind would agree that was non-consensual. And there are also so many different layers to that. And it was not that long ago that rape in a marital situation was not actually even considered a thing. And it just, I think this goes to highlight our collective consciousness increasing, where we're starting to be able to have these conversations and come into alignment and clean the stuff up that has been horribly out of alignment for decades and centuries and millennia. And so to bring that into the cultural understanding as part of the educational system for youth and adolescents, when we go through what's called sex ed, and I use quotation marks and parentheses because at least in North America, sex ed is not educational from a place that any of us would consider actual real sexual education. And an integral part of that is consent education. And the integrity piece that we were speaking to earlier around for young boys, and this will speak specifically to men because they're by and large the prominent perpetrators and predators in these situations, for there to be a really crystal clear understanding collectively of what is okay, what is consent, what is yes, and what is not okay. And the maybe or the unspoken consent actually being a lack of consent. Until a full fuck yes has been given, it's a no. And for there to be a really crystal clear understanding of what that is and how we operate in integrity, and then the consequences, the punishments for being out of integrity, and then really what I think you and I, Ian, are focused on is okay, once we understand what is appropriate, then how do we provide, again, just speaking to men and boys specifically here, how do we provide these young men with the tools and the understanding of what sexual energy is, how it moves, how it operates in our body, and what we can do to be in command of that energy rather than succumbing to those sexual impulses or compulsions, and also how to clean up our experience with sexuality so that it's not going down further and further down the road of distortion through, something that could start out as a recreational porn use that left unchecked can snowball into addiction and snowball into more and more intensity and just that increasing stimulus required for a man to get what he thinks is a sexual need. But then ultimately, where I would bring it back to tie a bow on this is how do we create really thriving, healthy, fulfilling, deep sexual relationships for men and women so that there's a level of fulfillment within us that we're not seeking outside of ourselves for something else.
Mm. Aspen, is there anything you want to add to the punishment piece and, in connection to like people being held accountable before we start to go past that piece? Is there anything that seems important for you to say about that?
I feel that if one person's punished, is another person going to start something similar? Like it just kind of keeps the like punishment system, like we're saying, it's not working. Um, I do think people should be held accountable. But who's held accountable? The person that made the website, the people that are posting in it, the people that are contributing to conversation, the people consuming the information. Like that's an endless list of who should be punished if we're going that route. So I don't have a clear solution. I think sites like this probably shouldn't exist. I don't think there's anything appropriate going on them that really needs to exist. So taking down sites like this for whoever has the power, but then there's also other issues with censorship and freedom of speech that I know get woven into that conversation.
Mm.
Um, but really the evolution piece, like I don't think that men should be completely shunned for their participation in these things. If they're open to some education and evolution, then I really think that that's more of the focus is like inviting them into spaces of men's work and sexuality work so that they can actually evolve their view and approach and relationship with it. How we do that, I don't have an answer to. I love the work that you both are doing, but I don't have an answer on the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think any of us do, and that's the beauty of, importance of having these conversations. And I think switching past, the punishment piece and into other categories that I think are predominantly being missed is that, in my opinion, the way that it's being treated and the way it's being treated by most men that I know are leaders of other men that's been bothering me is stopping at condemnation and that being the end of the story is where all curiosity is lost and where patterns will repeat. And I feel in these conversations, I'm like, this is insanity. We're going to keep doing these same things and expecting different results. We're going to, just keep focusing on this one thing and expect something different. I don't think that's going to happen because ultimately, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, Hawks, is like, I believe like you said, these men are in supreme levels of distortion. Something has happened. Maybe it was maybe the first porn video they watched at 11 years old was something crazy and it started then. Or maybe they were, maybe something happened to them. Maybe they were abused in some way. Like, we don't know these stories of so many people. And I know every man that I talk to in some way has a relationship to sexuality that happened early on that was confusing, that they didn't understand, that they felt that they were broken or something was wrong with them. Like that starts as seeds early on and across decades with all the crazy videos we have access to, with all the things that we experience in this crazy society. It's not that hard to go from A to B in those levels of distortion. Even in, even to the crazy levels that we're seeing in this year, it's like there is, for me, so much to be curious about, which is how do these people become this hurt? How do these people become this distorted and toxic? Imagine for a moment, what must it be like to live in the mind and body of a man that could do something like this? And all I can imagine is that it would be hell. It would be a hell that I can't even possibly fathom. And I fear, in even bringing up that part of the conversation, it's like, you know, the voices can come out that's like they're not there's no empathy to have for them because they're just brutal, they're the worst of the worst. But that's where I think we will stay stuck until that lens goes deeper. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Do you have anything coming up?
I think this is a really important part of the conversation, and like there's a high likelihood that if any of us were walked the exact same path in life and experiences that these men do taking part in this, there's a high likelihood that we would be committing the same acts. And that's just the reality. Um, so I believe that this conversation is important and it starts at a really young age, having role models, having the conversations around intimacy and sex and relationships is hugely important. And I think that's a huge thing that's like it's been so taboo to talk about sex or anything that happens behind closed doors, that there's so much guilt and shame associated with it that, what's hidden just starts to really corrupt.
Hmm. Mhm. Yeah, I think it's like yes, all of that what you both spoke to, and I sense it is a delicate line to walk. What you're speaking to specifically in um, the empathy for the predators, and I think it's important first to acknowledge and empathize with the the victims in these situations. And like you're saying, it's not a complete conversation until, from my perspective, until we also, as Aspen was speaking to, walk a mile in the shoes of the perpetrator, because we've all had different life experiences, and there is something or a long series of events that happened in a man's life to get him to where he is and to be committing the acts of either benevolence or malevolence that he is. And until we really, like you're saying, Ian, get curious about what is that leads a man to commit an egregious act like what is being surfacing in the Epstein files or the CNN piece, until we really look at what is it that makes a man into that, then we can't really actually resolve this in a way that's long lasting. And that's what I'm really interested in. It's a it's generational work. And I feel that for someone who's committed the the degree of harm that these men have in the CNN piece or in the Epstein files, there needs to be immediate consequences that are appropriate to that level of harm that was committed. And I'm not the one to decide what that is. I don't want to be that guy, but there does need to be, in my perspective, severe consequences for that.
Hmm.
And where I really focus that curiosity that you're speaking to, Ian, is okay, what can we learn from this? And how can we prevent this from happening in the future? And where can we intervene for men who are starting down that path of this lack of control and sexual distortion, and bring the corrective measures in at that point. And I see you nodding. I know, like, yeah, you're passionate about this work. This is so much of what we do in men's sexual mastery as well, because it is correctable. And I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it with men you work with, where there can be such a transformational relationship that a man can undergo with his own sexual energy and how he expresses that, that I know that there are solutions here that work. And it's a matter of getting this into the hands of men who are starting to go down that path and have the awareness. And I get a lot of men coming into our programs with the awareness of, I'm not in integrity. And it's important to me that I get into integrity with this sexual energy. I don't feel in control, and I don't like that feeling, and I don't like how that shows up in the world and how it affects the people I love. Even if it starts as using porn while you're in a committed relationship, that is causing harm for the partner you're with. A lot of people would consider that cheating, and it's these blurry lines of like, what is, where is that line? And that's for each of us to have our own connection with our own morals. And that's a really difficult thing to teach, but it came up at the leadership summit with Sacred Sons. And again, there are systems for this, but it requires a deep education and mentorship for men that's we just have so many of us have been lacking in that. And collectively, I think this is when I take the big eagle eye view of like, why is this happening? How is this possible? Looking at the father wound, looking at the uninitiated, unguided man trying to, and actually like man child making his way through the world, trying to figure it out on his own, and actually just not having the level of education and mentorship and guidance and support from integrated men, from real embodied leaders who can show a lost, confused boy or man child like, hey, there's a way here. Let me show you. And like, and you're forgiven if and when you actually create the real repair that's required for you to now move in the world in a way that's really honorable. And so really it's I see it as like, how do we bring this to men who then can raise boys of their own and pass this on? And then also, how do we bring this to the youth who are already growing up without a father figure who can really show them this way?
Yeah. Thank you so much for heading that direction. And I think that's the piece that is often missed around the curiosity and empathy. It's not particularly just for that perpetrator. It's that there is a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old boy that's being raised in the world right now that may eventually be that without things shifting in that path. And I think people get caught up in the empathy and the curiosity being about the focus on the perpetrator or the predator that needs the accountability first. And it's like, no, it's to see the threads that go back so that we can change what we're doing right now to alter the 10, 11, 12-year-old that's so confused and terrified and on his own right now, exploring these powerful sensations and chemistry and psychology that's correlated to this part of our body. And in 10, 20 years is going to be that predator. The only way that it will change, it's not, you know, it, there's an old parable about like bodies floating down a river and like the monk being on the side of the river and everyone's just pulling people out from being in the river and he starts walking up the river and he's like, they're like, where are you going? We got all these people to pull out. He's like, I'm gonna figure out why all these people are going in this river. And they're like, oh, okay. And like similarly here, it's like, how do we go focus on upstream instead of just and once again, back into the, Epstein, those people need to be held accountable. Yes, they need to be pulled out of the river. And in CNN, these people need to be held accountable. Yes. And the evolution has to be looking up the river and finding the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds that are lost and, teaching the fathers, because there's still so many fathers not having these conversations with their children, with their sons, and it's just this huge education piece. So, um, that's what I got.
And I also believe a huge part of this is not just relating to your partners, but all women and like believing women. Um, our judicial system, like I've heard of women going into like report something and the difficulties in reporting any sort of at-home abuse or any threatening situations has made it so difficult that it then puts them into unsafe scenarios and then they're less likely to report and actually have something dealt with. Beyond just your partnership and how you're interacting with your wife, your girlfriend, whoever it is, it's like relating to all women and like really giving them your presence and belief, like believing what they have to say. Because women are also facing this epidemic of like freeze response and fawning response that just like that's what often a female nervous system like sinks into. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's a huge part of this is just like really listening and believing women when they're starting to say, like, something's not right at home, like, I need help.
Mm.
Really difficult to say. And for many generations, like especially like my grandma's generation, even my generation, it can put you in a really dangerous situation for how you live your life. Yeah, I just feel that was important to bring up in this, that, yeah.
I sense that one of the one of the many things that this emergence, this illumination that this CNN article has provided, one of the valuable aspects of that, perhaps for women, is this feeling or is this new level of collective awareness of just of a how much of a serious problem this is and how real it is. And with the Epstein files too, that was what for me it was like, holy shit, I'd heard about pedophiles, I'd heard about this child sex trafficking, really dark stuff. But until the Epstein files came out and there was this collective illumination of it to the point where it's like, okay, you can no longer put that in like the conspiracy theory or out of sight, out of mind kind of place. It's like, okay, this is real. Holy shit. And so, like Aspen, yeah, like you were saying, to really listen to women and hear the real concerns and those hits of like the intuition that you were speaking to there, where even if it's not something that there is a series of hard evidence facts that can portray that this egregious thing has happened, to really listen in. And I feel for us as men who wish to be and have the intention to be in a protector role, that's so much of our job, is to actually really feel into and listen and see and hear the women in our lives, and then to find the ways that we can step into that protector pillar. Because, and this is something that, again, it came up a lot in the Sacred Sons Summit, that and I feel ultimately to come kind of back around to this solution and the transition from punishment to like, what do we do to actually prevent this rather than just locking someone up after they've already committed the crime? It's like to have pillars of protector, masculine energy all around, an army of men who are really there to protect women and children with that intention deep in our hearts, and to be observing and watching, understanding that, hey, there are predators out there.
Yeah.
And actually, part of my role moving through the world is to be watching and observing and looking for that, in a similar way to how many women move through the world, watching and looking and observing for places and people where they don't feel safe. that alarm, that alert is very woven into, I think, the female experience moving through the world. And for us as men to realize that, hey, that must also be woven into me, not because I feel unsafe for myself, but because there are women and children, people I love, or people I don't even know, but I still can hold a responsibility to look out for their safety. And so to have men that can also step in and intervene, that story that you shared earlier on in the conversation about your friends back in university who had been drugged in a bar. And the reason that they weren't taken home by the perpetrator there was because there were people that cared for them that were able to realize, hey, you don't seem well. Let me take you home somewhere safe. And so I think, one of the many pieces that we can take away from this as men is like, hey, we have a really important role and responsibility. It's not enough to just not be the guy who's doing that fucked up stuff, but actually we are required. We have a role to play in protecting and keeping an eye out and letting, those like men out there with some of that predator energy know like, hey, I'm here, I'm watching you and this isn't okay. And to be yeah, to help establish that safety again.
Which is wild to me when you say that because I'm realizing that it will take organization of men that care about these things because right now our role models are shit. The greatest thing I can think of when it comes to protection that we're modeled as young men, particularly in North America, is like the government and the military. And we know that the example of protection is like cops, army, Marines, Navy, all these things. And those are more things coming to the surface is like how corrupt those quote unquote protectors are on a global scale. So it's like our model of healthy protector is full of so much distortion that it really does require building, I don't know why this word's coming to my head, building a new brand of what healthy masculinity is and why.
Mhm.
Really the shining beacon is why does a young man that's probably learned more about being a perpetrator than a protector, what is his inspiration to go on the journey of facing all his inner challenges and hardships to move from an unintegrated, unaligned more on the predator side over to protector and shining that light that is like a moth to the flame that makes younger men go, "Oh, I want to be a protector. I want to be out there and protect and like serve and like yeah, be a giving." And so much of what we're modeled through all these pipelines is like it really is perpetration as the shining light, get as much as you can, do whatever you got to do to get it. Like that's what so much is being modeled out there. So I'm seeing the importance of these conversations and that us as men that are committed to this path continue to sharpen our iron of like how do we become that flame that attracts the moth that is young men and older men that have to go on that journey from being taught to be a perpetrator to being attracted to being a protector.
Mhm.
I know we could go on forever about this, and I'm grateful for the time you've already given me. So I'll just pass it off to you two to for any final notes.
I couldn't agree more with the importance of role models. Role models that we can really get behind in not just one aspect of what it means to be masculine, but in all of the healthy, mature expressions of that. And I do feel blessed, and I imagine you would agree, when you said we don't have good role models, I heard that as speaking from the collective experience as men and maybe a past, version of yourself, which I can relate to deeply. And I feel so blessed to actually be able to sit here and say, man, I've got some awesome role models.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and this is part of, this is such a huge aspect of men's work is get with a community of men that actually inspire you and that actually are calling you up into your greatness and are living in alignment with the values that you are calling yourself into, and find mentorship. Find men who are further along on that path who can serve as the role model that you may not have had growing up at home or looking around to the government or military or whatever these other aspects of more kind of typical role models we might think of. And so really grateful for strong role models in my life, and one of them being my partner Aspen's dad. So shout
Wow.
out to Mark Percival, who's become a great role model for me and such an amazing expression of really, really heart-centered and powerful embodied masculine presence and fatherhood. And so yeah, with that, I'll pass it on to you, Aspen. How'd you like to close things out here?
Yeah, I feel systemically this comes back to how we approach and treat Mother Earth and our like taking
Mm. Mm.
and our abuse of resources.
Wow.
And like when it really comes back to it, it's like when we return to reverence of Mother Earth and returning and giving and being of service to nature, then that way of being comes so much more naturally. Like that like reverence for the woman who has all the seasons and the cycles of nature within her. Like I just get goosebumps thinking about that. Like when you have that reverence for nature, like it's hard to act out of integrity, I believe. So
Mm.
just root back into that is the ultimate goal. That like ecofeminism approach is what I'm here for.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, you just lit me up with goosebumps as well. And yeah, I'm in agreement with that. And thank you, Hawks, for pointing that out that I do have great mentors in my life and they do exist. And may there be more of them sprouting all over the world right now. And ultimately, my hope in these conversations is, yeah, that inspiration to be that one conversation or that one idea that inspires a man to either continue his journey or begin his journey of personal development. And yeah, really grateful for you in my life. Wonderful to spend this time with you, Aspen. And the conversation continues. It's nowhere over, but we continue in its evolution. So thank you both for being here in the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. Thanks, Aspen. I would love to pull on that thread that Aspen just closed things out with, because yeah, that's a really important other conversation around how we relate to the feminine within, outside of us, being the women in our lives, and then zooming out even further from that, our collective Mother Earth, and as within, so without, as above, so below. And yeah, I would love to continue that conversation at some point. So we'll leave it at that for now.
We'll do it
Thanks a lot,
again.
Ian. It's great to
Yeah.
drop in with you.
Yeah. And to all the listeners, if anything popped up wherever you're watching this, YouTube, Instagram, whatever, put it in the comments. Let's keep the conversation rolling. It's better to be alive than to just, fade away as we throw it out into the internet ethers. Like, keep it rolling and bring your own presence and your own perspective. So, thank you for being here with us.